I watched it tear through 3 layers of reinforced carbon steel like it was wet paper. 22 years of my life gone in a single silent heartbeat. I am Dr. Kovacs, the foremost expert on the apex predator of the Kalos system, the silencer, and today I realized I don't know a single damn thing about it. My species, the Valari, are the galaxy's ultimate observers. We pride ourselves on the clinical, the objective, and the patient. We don't just study life, we dissect the very essence of its survival through decades of meticulous data. I have watched the silencer feed, I have watched it mate, and I have watched it slaughter my own colleagues. Yet after 2 decades of monitoring its every vibration, the creature remained a ghost in our machines. It wasn't just a predator, it was a physical impossibility that defied every known law of biological thermodynamics. Every time we thought we had mapped its sensory range, it would bypass our most expensive scanners as if they didn't exist. The silencer was a god of the shadows, and we were its trembling priests, offering up our logic at an empty altar. Then the Terran arrived. His name was Elias Vance. He didn't arrive with a team of researchers or a mobile laboratory. He walked into the observation deck wearing a stained flight jacket, carrying a plastic cup of some steaming brown liquid that smelled like scorched earth. He didn't even look at the data monitors. He didn't look at the infrared maps or the sonic wave charts I had spent half my life perfecting. He just leaned against the reinforced glass of the containment cell, squinting his eyes as the beast drifted through the artificial mist below us. The beast was a mass of shifting obsidian plates and elongated limbs, its presence barely a ripple in the air. My heart was pounding, the familiar terror of the beast's proximity tightening my chest. Elias, however, just took a long, noisy sip of his drink and sighed. I expected him to ask for the briefing files. I expected him to be intimidated by the creature that had claimed the lives of 14 high-ranking Valari scientists. Instead, he tilted his head and made a clicking sound with his tongue. "You guys have been trying to measure its heartbeat, right?" Elias asked. His voice was casual, almost dismissive. I bristled, my crest rising in instinctive defense of my life's work. "We have used the most advanced sub-quantum pulsars in the Federation, human," I snapped. "The creature possesses no detectable circulatory rhythm. It is a biological void." Elias didn't look away from the glass. He just pointed a scarred finger at the creature's lower abdomen, where a small, almost invisible vent was pulsing in a rhythm that didn't match the creature's movement. My breath caught. I had seen that vent 1,000 times. I had categorized it as a vestigial heat sink. I was wrong. The human hadn't been in the room for 5 minutes, and he was already rewriting my textbooks. But that wasn't the worst part. The worst part was when he turned to me with a terrifyingly calm smile and said, "It knows we're talking about it." The silence in the observation deck became heavy, thick enough to choke on. I stared at the human, then back at the obsidian nightmare below us. "Nonsense," I hissed, though my voice lacked its usual academic authority. "The silencer lacks auditory receptors. It navigates via seismic vibration and electroreception. It cannot hear us through 6 inches of lead-lined glass." Elias didn't argue. He didn't even blink. He just set his cup down on the edge of the 1,000,000-credit console and stepped closer to the barrier. He placed his bare palm flat against the cold surface. "It's not hearing your voice, Doc," he said, his tone dropping into a low, gravelly register. "It's feeling your fear. You're vibrating like a tuning fork every time you look at it. To that thing, you're a dinner bell that won't stop ringing." I felt a chill that had nothing to do with the climate control. For 20 years, I had treated this creature as a specimen, a puzzle to be solved with logic and mathematics. To Elias, it wasn't a puzzle, it was a peer. Suddenly, the silencer stopped.
Its fluid, boneless motion halted mid-stride. It didn't turn its head, because it had no head in the traditional sense, but its entire body oriented toward the human's hand. This shouldn't have been possible. The containment cell was designed to be a sensory void, a vacuum of information, yet the beast was reacting. It wasn't the blind, instinctual lunge I had seen 1,000 times before. This was calculated, a slow, deliberate recognition. "See that?" whispered Elias. "It's testing the glass, not for strength, but for frequency." I watched in mounting horror as the obsidian plates on the creature's back began to oscillate. It was a movement so fast it became a blur, producing a sound that was less of a noise and more of a pressure in the back of my skull. My internal organs felt like they were being squeezed by invisible hands. I scrambled for the emergency shut-off, my hands trembling. "It's overloading the containment dampeners," I screamed, over the rising hum. "If those plates hit the resonant frequency of the carbon steel, the whole deck will shatter." I expected Elias to run. I expected him to panic. Instead, he did something that defied every survival instinct in the Valari genome. He began to hum back. It was a low, melodic drone, a sound from the deep history of Earth's ancient forests. I watched, frozen, as the silencer's plates suddenly went still. The pressure in my chest vanished. The creature lowered itself, pressing its horrifying form against the glass, directly opposite Elias's hand. For a moment, there was a peace so profound it felt like a religious experience. The predator wasn't hunting, it was listening. "How?" I gasped, collapsing into my chair. "How could you possibly know what frequency would stop it?" Elias finally looked at me, and for the first time I saw the true depth of the human spirit in his eyes. It wasn't intelligence. It was something much older. It was the intuition of a hunter. "I didn't," he admitted. A grim shadow crossed his face. "I recognized the song. My people used to be the things in the dark too, Doc. We just forgot." Then he whispered, "They're here."
The primary alarm didn't scream. It groaned, a low-frequency rumble that shook the very foundations of the research station. I looked at my monitors, my 3 hearts hammering against my ribs in a frantic, uneven rhythm. Every external sensor was flatlining. "The perimeter is gone," I whispered, the words tasting like ash. "But how? There are no ships, no warp signatures." Elias didn't look surprised. He was still watching the silencer, which had flattened itself against the floor of its cell, its obsidian plates vibrating in a low, subharmonic purr. "They don't need ships, Doc," Elias said, his eyes reflecting the strobing red lights. "They're migratory. You didn't find a predator in this sector. You found a waypoint." I felt the room tilt. 20 years. I had spent 20 years believing I was studying a unique, solitary apex killer. I had built this entire facility around the idea of a singular, magnificent beast. "A waypoint?" I stammered. "You mean there are more?" Elias finally turned away from the glass, his expression one of grim pity. "A lot more. You caught a juvenile, a scout. It was lost, and it was calling for its mother. You didn't hear it because you were too busy looking at its biology to listen to its heart." The ground buckled beneath us. A screeching sound, like metal being ground into dust, echoed from the landing bay levels below. The silencer in the cell responded with a piercing, triumphant shriek that shattered my display screens. This was the moment my world ended. The logic of the Valari, our superior technology, our centuries of recorded knowledge, it all meant nothing in the face of a biological reality we were too civilized to see. We had treated the universe like a laboratory. Elias was treating it like a jungle. "We have to go," I shouted, reaching for my emergency kit. "The evacuation shuttle is at the North Spire." Elias grabbed my arm, his grip like a vice. "The shuttle is gone, Doc. They hit the engines first. They're smart. They know how to isolate a nest before they clear it." He was right. The external cameras flickered to life for one final second before dying, showing a horizon covered in shifting black shapes.
thousands of them. They moved with the same fluid, terrifying grace as the creature in the cell. I felt a wave of absolute despair. We were dead. There was no escape from a swarm of that magnitude. But then Elias did something that made no sense. He didn't reach for a weapon. He didn't look for a place to hide. He walked over to the containment controls, the ones that held the juvenile captive. "What are you doing?" I screamed. "If you open that door, it will kill us both." Elias looked at the controls, then at the creature. His hand hovered over the release. It might, or it might be the only thing that tells the others we're not just food. He looked at me, a flicker of something fierce and ancient in his eyes. In my world, we have a saying, "The enemy of my enemy is my friend." But there's another one, if you want to talk to the wolves.
The hiss of the containment seal decompressing was the loudest thing I had ever heard. It was the sound of my death warrant being signed in a rush of pressurized gas. I slumped against the far wall, my primary eyes squeezed shut, waiting for the inevitable sensation of obsidian claws tearing through my thorax. I had spent 2 decades cataloging its lethality. I knew exactly how long it would take for the juvenile to end me. 3 seconds, maybe 4 if it wanted to play. I waited, but the strike never came. Instead, there was only a soft, rhythmic sound, the sound of heavy armored limbs moving slowly over the deck plating. I opened one eye, then the other, and what I saw defied every law of xeno-biology I had ever defended. The silencer wasn't hunting. It was standing inches from Elias Vance, its towering, jagged form dwarfing the human's frame. Its many-faceted eyes, which I had written were incapable of focus, were locked onto the human's face. Elias didn't flinch. He didn't even reach for the small pulse knife at his belt. He just stood there, breathing in the same rhythm as the beast. The bellows in the creature's abdomen were moving in perfect synchronization with the human's lungs. It was a terrifying, beautiful mirror. "You're insane," I whispered, my voice cracking. "It's going to kill you the moment it realizes you're not one of them." Elias didn't look at me. He reached out, slowly, deliberately, and touched the creature's snout. The silencer let out a low, vibrating hum, a sound so resonant it made the remaining glass panels in the room vibrate. "It already knows I'm not one of them, Doc," Elias said softly. "That's why it's not killing me. It recognizes a fellow traveler." I realized then that our species had failed because we were too successful. We had climbed to the top of our world through logic and tools. We had forgotten what it was like to be part of the food chain. Humans, however, seemed to have kept one foot in the primordial muck. They weren't just observers, they were players. Suddenly, the heavy blast doors at the end of the corridor began to buckle. The sound from the other side was a nightmare made manifest, 1,000 shrieked harmonies, a chorus of hunger and rage. The swarm had finally found us. The juvenile turned its head, its obsidian plates flaring like a peacock's tail. It let out a sound that wasn't a shriek, but a command. The scratching at the door stopped instantly. A silence followed that was even more terrifying than the noise. "They're waiting," I whispered, my heart's freezing in my chest. Elias looked at the buckled door, then back at the creature he had just freed. A strange, dark smile played on his lips, a smile that looked far more predatory than anything I had seen on the silencer. "They're waiting for an introduction," he said softly. The blast doors didn't just break, they exploded inward. But it wasn't the swarm that entered. It was something much, much larger. A shadow so vast it blotted out the emergency lights. The mother had arrived, and she wasn't looking for her child. She was looking at the human. Then she bowed.
The mother didn't just enter the room. She claimed the space as if reality itself were merely a guest in her presence. She was a mountain of segmented midnight, her plates clicking with the sound of 1,000 closing coffins. I fell to my knees, my respiratory vents seizing. This was not a creature. This was an extinction event. And yet she stayed her claws. She lowered her massive primary head, a sleek, terrifying prow of bone and sensory pits, until it was level with Elias Vance's chest. The bow wasn't an act of submission. It was the heavy, weighted recognition of a predator meeting an equal. My instruments, still flickering on the peripheral floor monitors, showed no heart rate for her. She was a biological engine of pure, silent intent, waiting for a command that had no words. "Why?" I gasped, the word barely a vibration in the air. "Why does it acknowledge you?" Elias didn't look back. He kept his hand on the juvenile's snout, but his eyes were fixed on the mother. "Because humans didn't start in the stars, Doc. We started in the tall grass. We spent 1,000,000 years being hunted by things that were faster, stronger, and had better teeth. We learned their language. We learned how to be the thing that keeps the monsters awake at night." He stepped forward, his boots crunching on the glass of my shattered dreams. "They don't respect your logic, your math, or your peace. They respect the fact that we can be just as cold as the void they call home. We are the only ones who can look into that abyss and spit in its eye without flinching." The mother let out a low, thrumming pulse. It wasn't a sound, it was a physical force that rattled my internal organs. In response, the swarm outside, the thousands of shadows waiting to feast, parted like a black tide. They formed a corridor through the ruins of the landing bay, a path of obsidian and silence. Elias gestured for me to move. I couldn't. My legs were water. "Get up, Doc," he commanded, his voice sharp enough to cut through my paralysis. "The station's core is breached. In 6 minutes, this waypoint becomes a supernova. Unless you want to see if your biology can handle atmospheric re-entry without a suit, I suggest you follow the lady." He didn't wait for my response. He simply began walking into the heart of the darkness, guided by the juvenile silencer. I stumbled to my feet, my primary eyes blurred with tears of sheer existential terror. I followed the human and the juvenile silencer into the throat of the swarm. As we walked, the creatures didn't snarl, they didn't strike, they simply watched us with an intensity that felt like being weighed on a cosmic scale. I realized then that the Valari were the anomaly. We were the fragile, polished glass in a universe of jagged stone. We had built walls of technology and called ourselves masters, while the humans had simply sharpened their sticks and waited for the dark to speak back. It was a humbling, horrific revelation that rendered my life's work completely obsolete. Elias climbed the mother and reached down, his hand steady as the station exploded in white light.